So my name is Shihan Van Clief, and I'm a father of three, a husband of one, and I'm a film director, writer, and producer.
And so, Shihan, you were telling me that you grew up in New York.
Yes.
And then moved to LA. So tell me about your experiences watching film when you were young, living in New York, and what New York means to you, what it was all about.
So growing up in New York, my relationship to film for sure blossomed. My father used to watch films all the time. We used to go to 42nd Street all the time and watch movies. So I remember, I remember when there were like long lines. You couldn't buy tickets in advance. I remember the first 3-hour line we stood in line for. First movie we stayed 2.5 hours. We saw Never Say Never Again when Sean Connery came back and was James Bond. But I grew up watching horror films, action, big Arnold Schwarzenegger, Steven Spielberg, Goonies, and then my father was Godfather, Godfather 2, obviously Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, but Empire Strikes Back is my one of those. And I watch film probably 2, maybe 3 times a week with my father. We'd stay up late on the weekends and watch films. So old horror films, The Boogans, and The Thing, which I fell in love with. And so when I moved to Los Angeles, it was just I was going to the movies a lot by myself, because not everybody was into movies the way I was, and so I found a group of friends who enjoyed going as well. So when I moved to LA, we used to walk to the movie theater, because out in Los Angeles, the transportation is not very good, and you have to drive. And at that time, didn't have a driver's license. I was still a teenager, so we would walk about 2.5 miles each way to the movie theater, and we'd watch films all the time. And sometimes we would sneak from theater to theater and just stay. Matter of fact, the first film I did that with in New York was when Commando came out. And I stayed in the theater and we watched it 4 times in a row.
I went with some friends and we lifted a sofa over the fence to a drive-in theater and sat on the sofa with our case of beer and watched Commando.
That's great. That's great.
That was back in college days. So, hey, tell me a little bit about LA as a youth, as you're growing up, and when did you kind of get the first inklings that film and the film industry might be something that you would want to be a part of?
Wow. When I first moved to Los Angeles, I wasn't sure how a career in film would be. So in my head, I was a writer. I went to school to be an English teacher, so I was writing. I was writing stories consistently, and I always felt like those stories would just be for me. And so it took until after high school. I graduated high school early. I was 16 when I graduated high school, so about my second year in college, I moved from the area I was in to Hollywood, and I started noticing stars, like movie stars. And I was like, oh shit, it's a lot closer than it seemed, because of the proximity of the people. Not necessarily the industry was any closer, but just seeing the people made it seem like, oh, it's closer than than I thought it could be. And I still wrote, and I gradually shifted the style of writing and the type of writing I was doing to writing more story form. And it was short at first, and I would say there was a big jump and a big gap between just the love of the writing and watching film to deciding I wanted to be in the industry of film. And so my first introduction into filming and film was actually in a commercial space. So I was writing commercials, and then I started directing commercials, and from there I was like, oh, I really enjoy doing this. And I had a great friend and mentor, Charles Murray, who basically challenged me to write a film. He said, you've been waiting a really long time, you've kind of just been lying to yourself and giving yourself too many excuses not to get things done. So get it done. And he challenged me, and I'm not the type who loves to be challenged that much. So him doing that actually lit a fire under me and got me to write my first horror film, and that's where that came from.
So what type of software did you use to write your horror film, and why did you choose that?
Oh, the film software that I used to write, the screenwriting software I used was, actually it was Celtics at first, or Celtics, right? And then I didn't really like how that layout was, so I moved to Highland. I love Highland 2.5, and I've been using that ever since. So everything I write is on Highland. And if I need to do any collaboration, I use Writer's Duet.
And what is it about Highland that you found so appealing?
I think Highland is, the layout of it makes the most sense. So I like to work in situations where I feel like things make sense for me, because even though I understand and can comprehend a lot of what's going on, sometimes even if it's simpler for somebody else in, say, Final Draft or something like that, Final Draft to me had too many bugs. It would shut down, it would, and so I just really enjoyed how comfortable I felt writing in it. And it gives me, I think maybe the timing of using it gave me so many details about my writing, whether it was how many words I was writing, how long in actual film time this was going to be, the breakdown between male and female characters, how much dialogue between the characters, and I thought that was pretty cool. So I've been using Highland, and I still use it, no matter what. Yeah.
So your mentor challenges you, and you pick up the gauntlet and say, okay, this time I'm actually going to do it.
Yes.
Okay, so now you're married and you've got children at this point.
Yes.
And so what are your thoughts about the complications of actually putting together a film and making sure that your family's taken care of in the meantime and balancing out that time?
I think I'm very lucky to have the wife I have. My wife and I have been married 22 years. We have 3 children, and she came from an art background, so she kind of understood what that entailed. So when we got together, she saw that my pursuits were in that field. And so it wasn't too, it's still a burden to have to leave and be away from family. But she understood, and I always made sure we're on FaceTime or I'm seeing the kids regularly. And we only shot for, I think it was 9 days total. We had 5 straight, and on the last day we had the kids come up. So on the 5th day, shooting up at the ranch, they came up and stayed. So it was just, I didn't want it to be separated in that way. But I do think there is this balance you have to find, and how much time you're willing to sacrifice with your family to do the things you love doing. No matter how much I love doing that other thing, my family means more to me than that. And so I always, which was part of the reason, my background before I made the full shift to being a filmmaker was a poet, and I used to travel the world reading and reciting poems and doing workshops at colleges and around the world. And that became difficult, having to leave home and being on 100 days out of the year, knowing I had children, and especially in the beginning when it was just one. And it made me, as a writer and as a person, feel like my wife was a single mother, but she wasn't. And so I wanted to find a way to make it so that I could stay home as often as I could and be there for them. And so luckily I found a great balance in the right work for the right amount of time. And I found that balance, and I've been working with that for a while now. So yeah, I'm very grateful.
Congratulations on that aspect of it. That's hard to balance for a lot of people.
It is. It's extremely difficult balance to find.
So you've got the germination of your idea for a film. Tell me about that process. How'd that come about? And a little bit about the irony of the name of the film in terms of yourself directly.
Yes. So the initial idea for my first horror film came from my mentor, Charles, a friend. He told me to read Rebel Without a Crew, Robert Rodriguez's book about creating El Mariachi. I read that, I liked that book, and then I found out that there was a doc series based on the book called Rebel Without a Crew, also where he got 6 writer-directors together. He gave them 2 weeks to do a film, and he gave them $7,500 each, and they could use 1 prop from his studio. And watching that, I was like, wow, if I would love to do that. And he goes, well, if you can come up with the idea that can be done for that much, I'll give you the money for it. And I said, oh, snap. So I went through my head and tried to figure out different things and trying to find trying to find stories that could be done for that amount, knowing what was available to me, who I had access to as far as my friend circle is concerned, and I came up with my first horror film because I love the horror. I love horror. I'm a big Stephen King. I love his books, but a big Stephen King fan, and I wanted to do a horror film. I wanted to do a horror film that also paid homage to the films I grew up loving. So, Halloween, not showing blood. I wanted to Scream Black Endless Scream, to have the Final Girl, the origin of a Final Girl, the social commentary of a film like They Live, which I also love, and I wanted to also put humor into it because I feel like there's such a thin line between humor and horror, and I feel like it has been explored more recently in better ways, and I wanted to test my hand in that because I think as a writer I should push myself in as many directions as possible to see what's possible in my writing and to see what worlds I can exist in comfortably and uncomfortable at first, but then get into the footing and make it work. So my first horror film, the irony of that was it was my first horror film, it was my first feature film, and my friend Charles said, this film is about you. You're doing the first film, getting these things. There's the fear of these things, but you're still excited about what's going on. And so it really lines up and parallels a lot to just me in general as my own person, but as a character within the story, where all the characters basically are different versions of myself, kind of like American Graffiti, like George Lucas. So yeah, that's kind of what it is.
So now you've begun the writing process, and it's coming along. Can you talk to me about, in the middle of that writing process, what worries did you have? What were you worried about as far as the construction? What were you worried about as far as the dialogue that you'd need for your characters? And then how did you begin to assemble a cast and crew on such a small budget as you used to make this 90-minute film?
Sheesh. All right, so about halfway through the writing process, I started to second guess what I was putting into the film, mainly because the budget I knew I was going to have compared to what I was writing made me think, is this possible? Can this actually happen with all these things I'm throwing in there? Is it possible? And so I was stripping things away, and about 40 to 45 pages in, I felt like we could start moving forward and start seeking cast and crew to work on the film. And I called one of my close friends, Ariana, to be brought in as a producer. She actually helped with some connective tissue on the writing to kind of just fill in some gaps that I had left out because I was rushing through and kind of just pulling from so many different things. And she really helped start tracking down cast. There were a couple of people in mind that I definitely wanted to make sure were involved from the jump. There were certain actors I knew that I had the roles in mind for from the jump. Just because I think they were dynamic and had range to be humorous yet dramatic and show fear and those things which I think were very necessary. And improv. There's a level of improv that I think was necessary for this film because of how the script was written out. And we winded up calling my DP. His name's Yancey Wells, and I told him, I think we can get this done. I told him what the idea was, and he goes, I'm in. Let's do it. And from there he started explaining, the difficulty of finding some of the other production people. Sound is going to be expensive, lighting, we're going to have to get these things. And so do we have any kind of budget for those kind of things? And so my DP did not get paid for the entire project. We paid the sound people. We paid external, so people who were quote unquote not necessarily part of our friend group was who we paid. And the friends came through. We had our AD, we had one of the producers was Gaffer and did sound or helped do sound when we had a day where a sound person wasn't able to show up. He filled in, he borrowed a sound kit, and actually we were able to get that done. The actors themselves, we did auditions. We did audition actors. Again, coming from friend groups and then reaching out to their friends because we have pretty much a larger circle of friends who are in that industry and are actors and aspiring actors. And we got Oh, and then the week after we settled, we had our first reading of the cast. People started having COVID. And I was like, they're not going to be able to show up on set. So we were having these fill-ins. And the fill-ins actually came through in the clutch in an amazing way. It also shifted some of the characters and the actors that we were having play some of the characters. So that even changed the weekend before we were supposed to start shooting. We did some shifting on set itself as far as story. Story was still being worked and still being written out and handled. And so there were some shifts in how the story progressed and evolved while we were filming. So it was a great process. I love process. I can't, I can't short and undercut the value that I see in process. And as much of a hectic schedule and things kind of got thrown into shit hit the fan, we came through. I think we had people that all were dedicated and committed to the project to make sure that we did the project that we walked away feeling good with. Because after asking people to do things for the most part for free, it would have sucked to look at something and go, that was horrible. It was a terrible experience, and the film is garbage. So it felt good finally getting it done and having to edit and color and do, send away the sound, get those things done, and then start putting it in festivals and getting audience to see it and see people respond to it that weren't friends. I think that was super important for me to have, was non-friends watching. They could become friends, but initially to see people who did not have any connection to the project enjoy it in a real way, and that felt great, and that was validating for my friends, the cast and crew, because they were friends for the most part, so yeah.
Now, going back to the screenplay, so you're writing the screenplay. Tell me a little bit about what you envisioned the film was going to be like while you were writing, and the differences between writing something for yourself, as in poetry, or the short stories you were writing, in your high school and college years, versus the collaborative kind of writing and process that film is. What are the differences? What are the joys of each, and what are the pitfalls of each?
Oh my God! Well, on the poetry side of it, the joy of it is being able to share stories that connect people. I think that's what I looked at poetry as. I think they are stories. Emotional storytelling is poetry to me. And the good side of it was I got to travel and tell my story. It's a more intimate level of storytelling. Also because I was performing it. So I'm standing there in front of an audience and telling my story and sharing my story and watching people in real time react to what it was. And the downside of that, or the drawback, was that I was leaving my family a lot to do that. For film, I knew that I was writing for myself first, but I also had to think about writing something that I think was, I wouldn't necessarily say missing, because there are so many films out there that I also have not seen, but I also feel like I wanted to see some of the things I was writing on screen, and I felt like the conversations I'd had with friends who were film lovers mentioned those same things that I made sure to put into the film. The thing with film, different than poetry, is once it's done, I don't necessarily always get to see how people respond to what it is. So it is something that, it's in the theater. If I wasn't able to come, I would have had no idea how people responded to anything. So I don't have the opportunity necessarily to be at every screen showing the film at every time that it's going to be playing. But at the same time, that also allows me to let go of things. The Kill My Darlings ideas. Like, sometimes you have to let the thing go and not hold it so tight that you can't let it breathe on its own. And so that was the thing. The collaborative nature of it was even allowing Ariana to do her fix-up writing on some of the dialogue things. That was uncomfortable at first, because with poetry, it's all me. It's like, oh no, this is mine. I'm not going to let someone else write in my poetry book. But for this, I understood, because I'm drawing from a bunch of different spaces. I'm also asking so many people to be part of the process that I should open up the process for some of those people to actually collaborate as well. So once I allowed that to kind of take place, and once that did take place, it was a lot easier the next time to allow someone to look, first of all, to just look at what I wrote, which is also extremely difficult to do, but it became easier after that process.
Tell me a little bit about the pre-production process, and once you've selected your cinematographer, how do you come to choose the format, digital versus film itself? And then after you're doing that, working with your cinematographer on set on the first day, and then how many days did you actually shoot, and were they consecutive or were they spaced out?
Okay, well, when I called Yancey, our DP, when I called the DP up, I spoke to Ariana, who was one of the producers. We had an AD, and Ariana worked with Alyssa, the AD. They worked together to lay out all the scenes, to actually structure out what our shoot days were going to look like. Because we know on the limited time we had, limited money we had, limited resources, we had to make this an efficient schedule. So it couldn't be, well, how about we try? It was, let's get these things done. And I had never put together a shoot schedule or a shot list or any of those things. And so watching them do that, it made me also feel more comfortable that we could get it done. When I called Yancey about the shot list, we went up to the places that we were going to shoot and started seeing what was possible. Okay, we can do this here. We can do this. It's going to be difficult. We could probably get this done, but we should also have an alternate just in case time doesn't allow us to get it done in that time. So what other places can we shoot this and have an alternative to what this was? And we were in pre-production, I think, a couple of weeks, pre-production. And we shot, like I said, about 9 days. It was 9, I'm pretty sure it's 9 days we shot. We had 5 consecutive days at the ranch. A lot of the film takes place on this ranch. We had, which was good to have it consecutive days. And we shot the first day in Los Angeles, and the next day we drove up to the ranch. So we were at the ranch for those 5 consecutive days. So 6 days were out right there. I'm sorry, 5 days were out right there. And then we had to wait for schedule for one of the actors to finish her production schedule. We originally finished shooting our principal filming in June, the first week of June.
Which year?
Of last year, of 22. June 22, we finished principal photography. We had to wait for one of the actresses to finish her schedule, and she wasn't able to be done until the end of August. The last week of August, she became available, so we got 2 days in there. That gave us the 7. We added 2 scenes after I was editing the film. I realized there were 2 things that I needed to connect the film so that it made complete sense to me. I don't know how other people would have thought, but to me it had to make sense. So we added this first shot day, like the first scene that within the film was shooting. And then we added this hide and seek scene between the director and an actor that is intercut within Black Guy's sauna scene. So that was a 9 days. So we did have 9 days. It was 9 days total shooting, but they weren't. Only the 5 were consecutive. The other 4 were scattered.
So let's take it to the days of shooting.
Yes.
Maybe some of your most interesting moments shooting, and how about talking about being the guide and mentor for your actors as a director in the film, because you had not done that before, working with actors and guiding them through a full feature film. And then maybe let's talk about afterwards you taking the film to film festivals,
okay,
and then seeking a distributor, which is the period you're at right now, finding a distributor for the film, and about that process too, and then what your hopes are for the film, since you're giving birth to it now, and getting somebody to be able to see it, getting it out to a wide audience.
All right. The most difficult thing that we shot, the most difficult time we had on set, I would say, was I feel like this is not crazy, but in the moment, it definitely felt crazy. So we have a scene where there's a tire blowout, and I wanted to make sure I got a shot of the tire. So I let air out of the tire so we can just get a single shot. It was just an insert, bam, and that's it. We had no way to fill the tire back up. And that was also the van we used to get cast from certain locations. And I was going crazy. I could not believe what had happened, and we had to call a tow truck, and it delayed. It delayed production. That was terrible. That was probably the worst thing that we had to deal with. The other funny one was we have a cop scene at the end where the cops show up, and there's gunfire, or they're screaming. I have the gunfire after and post, but the cops are yelling, "Freeze! Don't move! Gun!" And the neighbors had no idea what we were shooting at the ranch, so they called the owner of the ranch with concerns, and the owner called me. Her name is Molly. Molly calls me and goes, "Is everything going okay at the ranch? Because my neighbors keep calling me, and they were saying last night they heard cops screaming, 'He's got a gun!'" And I was like, "Oh, that's a scene from the film." She started laughing. She goes, "Okay, I got to tell my neighbors because they had no idea what you were doing." So those two were great. As far as working with actors and working through that process, I always felt that I was a director who wanted to allow the actors to try something first, and then I would scale back or add more and give my input accordingly. And that comes from me being a coach with poetry competitions, speech, debate, those things. And so learning how to coach them was something I incorporated into the directing side of film. And so I would let people, not too much input because I still feel it's the project that needs to be done, but I would let them do something that felt comfortable, and I worked that way. And I really am grateful for the group of actors that I got to work with. They all were professional and ready and game for what it is we were trying to get done. And I think some of them were a little thrown off by how loose it was and how much rope was kind of given to allow them to do things. But I also felt, in the same way with competition, I want people to feel comfortable. I feel if you go into a competition tight, I grew up doing martial arts also. My father's in the Hall of Fame for martial arts, so I realized in competition when you're fighting, if you're tense, you have to loosen up before you hit. So it's important to be loose instead of tight. And so I wanted people to be as comfortable as possible. And so, once they saw that was my way of directing, a lot of them kind of were able to kind of make it work.
You were also able to get a very famous star to appear in your film,
yes,
not as herself. Let's talk about that for a short bit.
So Rosario Dawson makes an appearance in the film, and that was great. She's a friend, and it was great directing her and her giving me an opportunity to work with her. I've known her for years, and she was like, "Let's do something." So her having her scene and what was going on in the scene was intense, and she was fully committed to it. She also was given the same rope everyone else was to try and see where that balance was in balancing the comedy, the humor with what is actually happening in the horror side of it. And so, I just was grateful that worked out, and I really like that scene. I actually feel my favorite scenes in the film are more towards the middle and end. That's one of my favorite scenes I really like. And I also, like I said, the sauna scene with the black guy and the hide and seek that goes in between it is my favorite scene. Those are my favorite scenes in the film.
Let's talk about your decision not to show blood and gore. I think that's a very important choice. It reminds me of Greek tragedy in the way that was all off screen and implied and it wasn't shown. So in this age where there's a lot of exploitation, you chose not to exploit.
Right.
And I'd like for you to talk about that a little bit.
My decision to not have exploitive violence on screen was based on the fact that I don't feel it's necessary. Now, it is effective in some films, but for me, I felt not knowing is more important than knowing. And not seeing does more because it lays more on the audience's imagination of what is happening instead of, and it also allows me as a writer and director to throw things for a loop because things are going on off screen, so you're not sure what is happening off screen, so something else could happen. You're like, oh, I thought, and it wasn't that. So that's kind of where that came from. Again, with Halloween, I think in the first Halloween, there's no blood in the first Halloween, if I'm not mistaken. Or if it is, it's like far off, it's not a... And I thought that was cool. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was great not to see. I think we have a scene where there's blood on her hand, but it's not from something that's happening. It's her picking something up and there being blood on the object that she lifts. And I wanted to find ways to figure out... I wanted to find ways to be creative with the choices of how we use violence, because I do believe there's a lot of exploitive violence being shown, and also, to me, that's not necessarily scary all the time. Just seeing someone just get hacked up, it doesn't do anything for me. I like to wonder, even in something that's not necessarily horror, in something that, like the movie Doubt, which is a play, right? So in that, you don't know what it is. And I think the conversation that's created off not knowing is more important than being given the answer. So that's why I chose to do it that way. Which is even how, which I'm not going to say what the ending is, but even how the ending plays out with who shows up also is about that as well.
What was your greatest moment of joy in the process of making the film before we start talking about film festivals and seeking film distribution? What was your greatest joy so far?
My greatest joy so far was actually seeing how much fun the cast and crew had on set. When I saw everybody joking around and the cast gelled really well, they still hang out to this day. Some of them knew each other, most of them did not. And so it was really cool to see them still connect after. So seeing them bond on set felt great. I was like, oh man, this is exactly what I want, because I wanted to build a team that moved forward and did other projects together. What I didn't want to do is have a million one-off, bunch of different actors. I wanted to build something with a group and with a team, and so having that was a great feeling. I love that feeling.
Now, you're taking the film to film festivals now. Tell me about how long you anticipate doing that, and in the meantime, you've got a couple distributors interested.
Right. We submitted to film festivals to just try and get the word out about the film and to see how audiences responded, how different people in different countries also responded to what the film was. I think we are done submitting for film festivals. So there's Origins, and there's one more waiting to hear from, and that will be it. So if it gets in that will be the last film festival that this shows up at. And then we move on to the distribution phase, which is what we're in now, which we're talking to a couple of distributors about getting the film out. We're also trying to figure out regions-wise, what regions it plays best to, what regions make the most sense, what the time frame that the distributors have the film for, so that we also feel like we're making the right decision on behalf of the film. And I'm looking forward to the film getting to as many eyes that are willing to watch, because I think with all art you have no say over the impact of your art. You just have the responsibility to create it, and then it's no longer up to you. Intent does not matter. I could intend for it to do a million things and make $20 million. It doesn't have to make $100 million, just make $20 million, whatever. Doesn't matter unless the people find the reason to invest themselves in it and invest their money into the project. So for me, as many eyes that are willing to watch as possible, and that they enjoy the film. They give it the shot. It is not going to be the slasher thing with a bunch of on-screen violence. It is going to be something that is enjoyable. I think another good feeling from the festivals we've been at was hearing people say, I didn't expect to laugh, or I didn't expect to walk out of the film feeling good in a horror film. Normally I walk out of a horror film like, oh shit. I walk out of this film like, I felt good. I enjoyed that. And I loved how, what goes on in the credits, like I enjoyed that. And I love that. So to me, if we can get enough people to appreciate what it is and just enjoy it, I'm happy with that. And then that gives me the opportunity to move to the next project, which I'm looking forward to as well.
Now, how about the advice you might give to somebody who wants to make their first horror film or their first film, be a first-time writer or director, now that you've gone through the initial process, the production process, what advice might you give?
The biggest piece of advice, honestly, would be to not be afraid to ask for help. I think I was so reluctant and so worried about asking for help for so much of my artistic life that that's part of the reason it took so long for me to do my first horror film, because I did not want to ask, for fear of them saying no, or for fear of them kind of just committing because they were friends or they didn't really have. And I realized how many people just were willing and loved. They were just surprised I even asked. They were like, I was wondering when you were going to ask. So I think your friends that are surrounding you actually will be a lot more supportive than you imagine them to be, but you have to at least take the opportunity and take the chance to just ask for the help and see what comes of it. So ask for help, and don't be afraid of the critique that you get. I don't think you should want to hear only, yeah, that's great. I think it is very important to hear, you might need to fix that, or have you thought about trying this, or what about doing this, or I think those are just as important.
Finally, you have a film career now. So what would you like for your 5 or 10 year plan that people talk about, or what would you like to envision in your wildest dreams happening for you as far as your involvement with film and the creation of films?
Wow. First, thank you. I feel like that was the first time I heard someone say, you're a filmmaker now. That's great. So for me, I think if I have given the opportunity in 5 to 10 years where I get to do at least a film a year, I would be extremely happy. I'd be ecstatic at that opportunity, and hopefully even more than one film per year or other projects or television, but at least one film per year and then other projects in between. But if I could do a film a year over the next 10 years, that would be amazing to me. And hopefully I have the access or the stories within me that make that a reality.
I have no doubt about that.
Oh, thank you.
Whatsoever. Shihan, it's been a real pleasure and an honor to have interviewed you. Thank you so much for spending the time this afternoon, and I hope this gets out to the people who really would benefit by seeing it, and to see your film, and wish you all the best success in the world.
Thank you very much, Rick. I appreciate you even asking me to be interviewed. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.